Hi, in front of you, you can see an example of an application that we're going to make using the Entity Framework. Now, in a previous edition of this application, we created a version that lets you search and we can display all the items in the database. And we wrote all of the SQL statements. And so we had select statements and delete statements and insert statements. But in this version, we're going to use the Entity Framework, which will shorten the code quite a bit, and we will still hopefully get the same results. So let's get started with a new project. If you haven't seen the previous videos on how to build this application, go look on the playlist to see if you can find the first edition of this. We're going to build on what we created in that video. So I'm going to start a new project here, so I'm going to click the Create New Project button in Visual Studio. I'm going to search for the ASP.NET Web application using the .NET Framework. I'm going to name my new project as James Bond Gadgets and put the word entity in it so I know that it's using the Entity Framework. Now on the next screen, I'm going to change one item here. I'm going to enable authentication. The previous version that we created had no authentication, and now we're going to change it. So the standard authentication that we usually create in an application is individual users' accounts. The others are for more corporate environments. But individual user looks like it'll work fine, so I'm going to click OK. Now, once we have the authentication listed there, we're going to make sure that MVC is selected and choose Create. So it looks like my application was created. If you can't see the database, let's go to the View menu and choose, what's it called? SQL Server Object Explorer. And you can see that we created databases in previous editions. Now let's run this application to see if it looks anything like we had before. So the new application is up and running. And you can see that we have the home page, the about page, the contact page. So this is the 3 pages that are given to us in the MVC format. So they're demos and examples that we can follow. Also on the right here, we have 2 new formats here, or 2 new pages. So I have a login page, which allows me to obviously log in. And if I don't have a login, I can register as a new user. So let's start here with the controllers. You can see that we have 3 different controllers. Let's go look at the models. We have something new here called the identity model. And this is going to help us with this entity framework. Let's go check out the views. You can see that we have the usual home, so those 3. And let's go to manage. We can have different things here that we didn't have before, such as set password, verify your phone number. And so all of these came from our authentication part. Now I'm going to go back to our previous project and copy some things that we had created in there. So I'm going to the File Explorer, and I'm in my repos folder. That's where I save all my projects. And I'm going to choose this one here called the Bond Gadget Collection. Let's see what's in there. So this here is the project that we did in a previous video. If you don't have this, you obviously need to go back and finish that first. So let's start with the controllers. So you can see that we have a gadgets controller. So I'm going to copy that, and then we're going to go into the controllers page here and right-click and paste it. So now let's go in to check out the gadgets controller and see if the namespace is correct. It is not. So you can see that in the previous edition of this program it said Bond Gadget Collection. So let's delete that and put in our new one. So the name of the project now is James Bond Gadget Entity. And up here it looks to me like we need to delete these 2. They're wrong. So now our gadget model is no longer valid. We're going to have to copy that in as well. So let's go back and find the next folder here. So let's go into Models. And there is the gadget model. So I think I can also just drag this into the Models folder and I get the same effect. Let's go check the namespace on gadget model. And it looks like we need to change that. Let's go look at the views. So in the previous edition of this program, we had an entire folder full of views called gadgets. So I'm going to just drag the gadgets into the views folder. And let's see what's inside gadgets now. So gadgets had 4 different views. Let's go and modify the namespace on each of these. So I'm opening up the details, and if we look at the top, you can see that there's a problem with the model, it says here. So let's go to get the proper project name. This looks like it's working again. We'll close that. Let's go look at the gadget form, do the same thing. So for each of these views, I'm just going to make sure that the model is finding the proper pathway to get to the model. Okay, let's go back and look at the controller. It probably needs a few updates as well. So let's go to Gadget Controller, and now when we see the gadget model and show potential fixes, sure enough, it shows that we can import from the models folder. All right, so the imports seem to be done correctly. Now, we are not going to import this project here, the Gadget DAO. The whole point of the lesson is that we are going to use the entity framework rather than the database access object like we had before. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to delete the code that's in each of our sections, each of the methods, and then I'm going to leave that for our homework to fix for the rest of this video series here. So I am getting the regular database object out of the way. Okay, so those are all gone now, and now it's time to update our database and show you how Entity Framework is functioning. So we'll do that in the next video. Hi, in this video we're going to create a database using the Entity Framework. Entity Framework is a way to synchronize the objects in your code to a database table. If you would like some more information about the pros and cons of that, see the link that I'm going to put up here that would show you how people can choose it or maybe not. So here's the process that we're going to follow. We're going to go into the models here, the gadget model, and we are going to change this, or we're going to start with this, and create a table in a database. It's quite easy, really. So I'm going to, first of all, go into a new identity models class here, and we're going to add something to make the database aware that this is an item in our project. So this here is kind of a list of all of the models that are in our project that are also going to appear in the database. So scroll down until you come to the section called the Application DB Context. So this is a class that is going to hold the list of all objects that are synchronized with the data in the tables. So to make this thing aware of our new gadget class, I'm going to come into this line here right after the class definition. So what I'm going to define here is just a property. So we'll use public, and the type of the property is called a DB set. So DB set means this is a set of things that you'll find in the database. Now I put in the model number or model name, which is gadget model, and then gadgets, it's going to be its name. So it'll be a list of type gadget. So we're going to be using Entity Framework. So I better include that as one of my dependency managers. So let's go up to the project name here and right click and choose Manage NuGet Packages. So we have the installed list and the browse list. So what I'm searching for is entity, and let's see what comes up. So the one that I'm looking for is this Entity Framework, and it looks like we are at version 6. So you can see that it's already installed in my project here. It says I have version 6.2 installed, and the latest edition is 6.4. So let's just update it to make sure that we've got the latest and greatest. It looks like I need to give it permission, so I'll choose the OK button, and then I'll accept the Apache 2.0 user agreement, and I'll watch the installation. And I have a message that says here that the old framework failed to uninstall. Restart Visual Studio to finish the process. Oh, great. So I'm going to restart it, and I'll be right back. Hey, it looks like the application actually restarted. Let's go and check a few more errors before we try to do anything else. I'm going back into the controller, And sure enough, I forgot there was a list here, something called gadgets. I'm going to remove that. And the extra gadget, it's called, we'll remove him. And let's see, I've got lots of things where we've got gadgets. Let's see, we'll take that out and this out. So we're down to just bare bones. And I think things are better now. Oh, here's another one, research results. Let's take that out. Okay, no more errors there. So we've identified to the application that we are going to have a list of gadgets. Now, I need to access this application database context inside of the controller where I'm going to use it. So let's go into the controllers again and choose Gadgets Controller. Now, up at the top, I'm going to create a constructor and then make a reference to our application database context. I want to then create a new property of this controller class. I'm going to label it as private, and it's going to be of type application DB context. And we'll just give it the name context. Now, in the constructor, I want to give this a new value. So we'll initiate it. We will set it to be a new application DB context object. Finally, when this controller goes out of existence, I want to dispose of this application DB context so it doesn't just keep up hogging up memory or connections to the database. All right, so now we've got ourselves a reference to this database context, and we're going to be able to start using it. So in the next video, we're going to actually create an instance of this gadget model, and it'll automatically synchronize with our database. So that's coming right up. In this video, we're going to take this gadget model, and we are going to synchronize it with a database, which will create a new table. So in the previous videos, we created a new gadgets controller that uses something called an application DB context. That application DB context has a reference to something in the identity model called the DB set gadgets. So you go back and watch the previous video to see how that works. Now this is in preparation for creating a synchronization using entity. Now I want to go find the window called Package Manager Console. If you don't see that, you can go to the View menu and choose Other Windows, and there is Package Manager Console right here. Okay, so we're inside of here. Now I'm going to type in the word enable hyphen migrations. Now this can be uppercase or it doesn't matter, and let's see what happens. So you can see the first line that comes up says checking if the target is using an existing database. So it's creating a database if it needs to, and then it's done. So let's go check the Solution Explorer up here, and we have a new folder. It's called Migrations, and then it automatically updated this thing called Configuration. Let's go look and see what configuration is all about. So it is going to do, has something called seed, and if we want to, we can actually put data into the database. All right, so now I've got this migration enabled. Now I'm going to type in the word update database. So now I have migrations enabled. I'm going to go to the command prompt, and this time I'm going to type in the word add migration, and then I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to call it initial state and press enter. So now I have a message that says the designer code for this migration file includes a snapshot of your code first model. So what that means is it went and looked in my models folder, and it was looking for the gadget model because it was listed as one of the properties. Now what you see here is a migration file. So this is just an executable file, and you can see that there's a method called up. So up means, you know, we're going to run this. And then there should be another one called down, I believe. So if we go down, you can see that it's like a reverse process. So the reverse process, you can see, is very short. It's just going to undo everything that the up function says it's going to do. Let's go look and see what's going to happen. So the first thing is, it says I'm going to run a method called create table, and it's called gadget models. Isn't that nice? So that matches. And you can see that all of the properties in the database match up with the properties of my gadget model. So this here is the coding that we've done in the previous project. Now let's see what the rest of this is. So we've got something called ASP.NET Roles, and that is for authentication and user login. So we've got user net roles, we've got a users table. You can see the users table has a whole bunch of properties. And so because we selected a project that includes authentication, it's going to create all these tables for us automatically. So what else do we have? Claims, we have logins, and then the rest of it. So we're going to see a new database appear in just a second. So now I'm going to type in the word update-database and press enter. Now this script that you see on the screen is supposed to run and create some tables for us. So you can see that it ran a few commands here and it said it created a new database. Let's go find it. So I'm going to open up the little folders here and choose databases. Now I've got one called James Bond Gadgets Entity and it has today's date. So what is today? Cinco de Mayo. How about that? Let's go see what's inside of here and let's go look at the tables. And what else do we have? Okay, so there's a whole bunch of stuff here that's all about logins and registration. So that's all things that were automatically done. Now the one customization that we've added is Gadget Models. Let's go see what's inside there. So Gadget Models has a script here that says this is what we ran. It says we're going to create all of these different columns in our machine, in our table. So let's go look at the data, see if there's anything in there. So there is no data. Okay. Now I'm going to populate this with more data. So we'll do this and then we'll stop the video. So what I want to do now is add a new migration. So I'm not going to change anything in my models. I'm just going to type in the word add migration and I'm going to call it fill database. Okay, so fill database is complete. Now you notice in the migrations folder we have two different files. This one's called initial state and the newest one called fill database. So fill database doesn't have any numbers in it, anything. So the up and the down are empty. So I'm going to now put some new code into here. So I'm going to give you some code to work with here. So I went to GitHub/Shad Sluiter and let's go see if we can find some of my repositories. And I believe that one of them will have the data that you need. Here it is, James Bond Gadgets. And you can see that I have some files here. The one I need now is the last one here called Migration SQL Statements. So let's take a look and see what this is. This is pretty much identical to the SQL imports that we did from a previous assignment. So there's going to be a slight difference where I put in the prefix of SQL at the beginning. So I'm selecting everything on this whole field here and I'm going to copy it. So let's right click and copy and I'm going to paste it into the up command. Alright, so there we've got 300 and some items and you can see that the SQL statements now have a command here in front. It says SQL and a parentheses and a semicolon at the end. So I did some text searching and replacing to make this happen. Now, when I'm done here, I can save the results and type in the word update database again and press enter. And now all of these things should be inserted into my table. Okay, so it ran and doesn't seem to have any issues. So let's go look at the gadget models and choose view data and see what's in there. Right now there's nothing, but I'm going to refresh the page. And there we have it. So we have an entire database that is filled with a migration. So what's the point of this migration thing and why do we do this instead of just go to the database? In Entity Framework, you're encouraged never to touch the tables themselves. You can go look at them, but don't go modifying column names or anything, otherwise the whole migration process will break. But the advantage here is that your project, when you deploy it, has these migrations so that you have the initial state now and the fill database state. And if somebody runs the migration update, all of these things are now snapshots. They're captured in the history, and so that the database is now created along with the project. So You don't have to send somebody a separate SQL statement to load the database and then make the project work. Now, another thing is that if you want to, you can revert. You can say, I want to roll back the database and then go back to a previous state. So we're going to now start programming the controller and see if we can access some of this data, but that'll come in the next video. In this video, we are going to create a search function based on the data that you see in this database using the entity framework. In a previous video, we created the data that you see here. We made an import statement. And we've also constructed some controllers. So let's go look at our gadgets controller and we'll continue working here. So we've also set up this access to something called the application DB context. So if you don't have that yet, we need to put that in there. I put in a constructor and a disposer, you might call it, and those are kind of initial setups. Now, the index page is where we're going to start. In a previous version of our application, we created a data access object. And you can see that there's no folder over here called DAO. We're going to avoid that altogether. Instead, we're going to use this method called the context, and we're going to get the data directly from the database using this entity framework. So what I want to do is in the index file or index view, I want to send it a list, and the list, we're going to call it gadgets. So gadgets needs to be filled. We need to populate it with a list from the database. So here's how that works. So the first thing I need to do is define the word gadgets, or the variable gadgets. So it's going to be a list, and it's of type gadget. Then what I want to do is assign it values. So all I have to do now is type in the word context dot. And you can see that one of the items in this extension is the word gadgets. And then after I've assigned it to gadgets, I need to say, hey, this is not just a database return list, it's actually a toList command. So I have to convert it. Now, where did it know that this context has gadgets associated with it? Well, that came from a previous configuration we made here in identity models. So you can see on line 24, because I gave this a property called gadgets here, it showed up in my context. So if I were to rename this, it's called this gadgets list, and let's go back and see what it does now in the controller. Obviously this is going to have to change, so we type in gadgets list. So you can use gadgets or gadgets list. So typically gadgets would be the proper way to do it, but just make sure that this is known to you. This is a user-defined field. You can name it anything you want, and you just have to remember what it's called. So let's go back to gadgets. Now, this is so simple. Are we done? It should be. We have an index view that is expecting a list, and that was created in a previous tutorial, so let's run it and see how it works. All right, the application's up and running. We no longer have the links in the nav bar, so maybe we should fix that, but we can at least get to the gadgets controller here. So gadgets, and press enter, and this will bring up the index page, which we just programmed, and there it is. So without any SQL statements written at all, we have gotten ourselves access to the entire list of gadgets from our database. So not too hard, huh? Okay, I'm going to close the application. Since I have the other nav bar in a previous project, I'm going to go back and search for the views and shared, and there it is, layout. So I'm going to copy layout and then put it into my shared folder over here. So that way I get my nav bar. Okay, I'm going to replace it, and let's just test and see if that actually helps now. Okay, good. So now I can see that I have new links, and if I choose Show Gadgets, it should bring me to the same page that I was just a minute ago. Yes, we are at the Gadgets controller. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to have to do is go and choose the search form, because right now if I try search anything, it'll probably break because it's not programmed yet. But that's coming up in just a minute. Hi, in this video we're going to use the entity framework to be able to search for one record. So we're in the middle of an application where we're building a list of objects, and we're trying to display one item this time. In a previous lesson, just the last video, we displayed everything here. So we're going to do something similar using this context variable. So in our controller, we are expecting to show details, and that makes one record visible on the screen. So we need to send a gadget, and we're going to then display that one gadget on the next view. So how do we get that gadget? Well, we first of all have to define it. So we're going to define it as a type of gadget model, and then give it the name gadget. We're going to get it from the same source that we got everything in the previous example, so context.gadgets. But now we need to filter it and just get one result. So I'm going to put in a dot. This time I'm going to put in the word single, and it looks like I have several choices. So I want to do single or default. Now, inside of the parentheses, I need to give it a filter name. So this is called an anonymous function. So I'm going to pick a letter like G for gadget, and then an arrow function, and then G dot. So G dot means give me the properties. I could choose name, ID, description, appears in. Well, I'm searching for this item here, which is the ID number. So let's choose ID equals, and then a lowercase ID. So this ID is the parameter that comes from up here in line 34. Okay, I've got an error. It says here you can't use this. You need to have a double equal sign, so therefore we're checking not assigning. Okay, so there's your format. So we've got one gadget that comes from context, single or default, and then the anonymous function is like a filter. So it says find only one guy. All right, and it's going to show a gadget here. Let's see if this runs. I'm going to run it and then test it. All right, so the application's up and running. Let's choose the Show Gadgets to display everybody, and we should see the entire list. So once the list is up, if I want to show the Geiger counter details, I go to the Details link, and you can see that gadget/details1 is what comes up. And it did find exactly one. So you can either type in a number at the top, such as 19, or you can go back to the list and select anybody from the list, and you can see the list. So there you go. That's the details item. And we have created a new type of selection here. It's called single or default, followed by this anonymous function that does filtering for us. And the next video, we're going to go and try the others where we got create, edit, and delete. Hi, in this video, we're going to use the entity framework to delete one record. So we've got a project here where we're creating this database, and the next function up on our schedule is to do the delete function. So in a previous edition we had some code in here, and I deleted it because we were using a SQL approach instead of the entity approach. Now I want to do the delete. So first of all, I can get the same results here if I copy from details and paste it into the delete area. So that will get me started. That will give me access to the one record that matches with the ID number. So context.gadgets single or default selects the one item. So the next two lines that we're going to make are going to actually do the deleting. So first of all, I'm going to call a state change. So I'm going to type in context.entry and say that I'm looking for the specific gadget. Change his state, so state equals. And then I'm going to look for something called entity state, which is found in system data entity. And then I'm looking for finally the word deleted at the end. Now that will set the state. And now I want the database to synchronize the changes. So I type in context.savechanges. And so that will now execute the statement. Now there's one other thing that I could do to make this code a little bit shorter, is I could delete the items, this whole library name, and then this should cause an error here. And then I can go and use that at the top of the page. So got the same effect. It's just that now I have to use the one of these up here. Which one was it? This guy, line 5. So before I test this out, I'm going to modify the index page down here. So if I were to send index into the controller or to the next view, it would probably have an error because I've just deleted one of the items. So I just want to change this from view to redirect, and I'm going to tell it to go to the pathway of gadgets. Quotation marks correct. So there we go, gadgets is the way. So now it will redisplay the index page. Let's see if that runs. All right, looks like the app's up and running, so let's go ahead and show the entire list, and then we'll delete one. So let's pick somebody out of the list. Let's choose Bug Detector and delete him. So I'm going to choose Delete, and it refreshed the page. So let's see, is there Bug Detector? Looks like he's gone from the list. So try to delete a few and see if you can test and verify that it's actually working. All right, so I'm going to go and check the SQL Server to make sure that the database is indeed deleting these items. So let's expand some of these, and let's see if there's some table or some items missing from the table. So let's go into the folder called Tables, and then we'll go to the Gadget Models, right-click and choose View Data. Okay, so it finally arrived here. You can see that it starts with item number 2, so I must have deleted number 1. And scrolling down the list here, I've got missing number 10. So 10 seems to be the one that was the bug detector. So it looks like the data is being deleted correctly. Now we're going to have to do some searching and editing in the next few videos. Hi, in this video we're going to work with the search form and the search for name function in our entity project. We're using entity to work with a database, and we're going to work with a search form. So let's say we got the search form already built, and now we need to create this method called search for name. So this is a continuation of a project, and if you haven't done it already, go back and look at some of the previous videos. So the first thing I'm going to start with in building this search query is to start with the context.gadgets object. So remember from previous work that this will get everything in the database that is a gadget. All right, so now we're going to build a link statement. So if you don't know C# link, that's another issue. But here's how it works. We're going to create a var and call it gadgets. And then we're going to use link. So link works like this. You say from, and then I'm going to use just the letter G. You can use any letter you want. G in the context gadgets, where g.name contains. So keyword here, contains. It doesn't have to match exactly. And then it says I'm going to contain the search phrase. And then I'm going to select G if it does. So that is a link statement. So it queries kind of like SQL statements do. Then after I've got the gadgets list here, then I can go ahead and pass it along. So let's type in gadgets. And we've got ourselves a finished product here. So this should actually work. It's pretty simple. One more line of code and then return it to a view. All right, so here we go. We've got ourselves the search button. So I'll do a search form, and I'm going to search for the name. Let's try gold again and search, and let's see what comes up. And sure enough, we've got ourselves a filtered list. So everything that has gold in the name has now shown up in my search results. So it looks like the next thing we need to do is work on the edit form and update some of these records. Hi. In this video, we're going to work with an edit form and change some records using the entity framework. So we're in the middle of a process to build an entire application that does create, read, update, and delete. And we're on the edit part, or the update part. So we have a method in our controller called edit. We need to get something by its ID number and then send it to the gadget form. So I think we already know how to do that. We have a delete function and a search by ID function. So I'm just going to copy this text and put it here. So this gives us a gadget item. So it says go find a single item that matches the ID number equal to the parameter ID. So this will get us a gadget. And then I can just pass that into the form. So gadget is going to have the form updated. Now let's test this. It won't actually process the form correctly, but it should display it. All right, so here we go. We got the application up and running. I'm going to show all gadgets, and then we're going to try the edit form. So let's try cigarette with cyanide and choose edit. And sure enough, we've got the edit form and it populates correctly. So this part of it seems to work. If I push the save button, it does show the database, but I don't think it will actually update it. So if I change cigarette with XXX and choose save, it does show it here, and I come back to the list and it still says cyanide. Now I'm going to choose the create new button, and oh, the application crashed. Let's see what the problem is. It says here in the validation, we've got ourselves an object reference not set to an instance of an object. In other words, it's null. So I don't remember this occurring before, but it's expecting a gadget model, and if it doesn't have any values, then the form doesn't process correctly. Well, we can provide it a value, so let's just go back into our controller. So let's go to the controller, gadgets controller, and the part right here is where we're working. So create, and gadget form is expecting a model. So let's give it something. Let's create a new, and let's call it a new gadget model. Now I could provide just the default constructor, and that'll give it, what did it give it? If I look at the model, you should see the constructor. It'll give us all this. It'll say nothing, nothing yet, nowhere, no one. I'm not sure if that's really what I want. I think what I want to do is just get rid of all those nothings, and let's create a bunch of blank strings, just empty strings, and save that. So now let's go back into the controller, and when we create the new model, it should show us an empty model. Let's go ahead and choose IIS and try it again. Okay, so let's go back into the app. Let's try show all the gadgets, and let's see if we can create a new one. Okay, so here we go. Let's try the create new button. This time it doesn't crash, and we've got ourselves a whole bunch of empty fields. Now the hidden item should have an ID of -1. So if you want to right click and inspect and try to find that, you should be able to see the hidden item. Also, if I go back and try the edit, I will get now the entire thing filled out. And if you choose the hidden form or the hidden item, you should see this actually has an ID number. Okay, so this here is the form. Now let's process the form after we push the save button. So let's go back to the controller to do that. Okay, so now the function that we're working on now is process create. So process create is either for updates or for creating new ones. Let's treat it as an update function first. So we are going to receive from the form a bunch of properties for gadget model. So we can get that and see if it's in the database. So I have a method here that will fetch this from the database. So I'm going to copy the example we had here. And the word ID doesn't exist anymore, but we do have a gadget model, and we can do that dot ID. All right, so now this will fetch something from the database, or will it? If it is a brand new gadget, then this should come back as empty, null. However, if it does receive some value back, that means it's been edited. All right, so the process of editing then says we're going to check to see if the gadget that was fetched from the database is null. If it's not null, that means we got something. And all we have to do is match each of the properties to the item that came in through the parameter. So name equals name, description equals description. So gadget.appearsin equals gadgetModel.appearsin. So we're getting the changes from the form, and then we're going to type context.saveChanges, and that should update the item in the database. So let's test this out to see if this works. All right, so here we go. Let's show the gadgets, and then we'll edit one of them. So let's try making this a capital cyanide. So I'm going to choose edit. Let's change the lowercase to an uppercase, and then push save. So it says here, the results are here. Let's go back to the list, and sure enough, the results in the database are also correct. Now, if I try to create a new one, and I don't think this will work, so if I try putting in a bunch of junk here, and let's see what happens. I'm going to push save, and it says it, but then if I go back to the list and scroll to the very bottom of the screen, I will probably not see that yet. So it is not here. I need to go and modify my controller to make that happen. Okay, so now let's return to the controller, and let's check the else statement. So the first was to see, is this in the database? If the gadget was there, then we'll update it. If it is not in the database, then we assume that it's a new one. So we're going to just now add it to the list. So we're going to say context dot, what was this called? Gadgets, there we go. And then I'm going to use the word add. So just like adding to a list. And who are we going to add? Well, this is the thing that was passed to us. So I'm going to copy him. And so we're going to add gadget model. and then we're supposed to save the changes. Now I could put save changes, or since this one is already up here, I'm going to just cut it out and add it afterwards. So I have one statement to save changes. All right, so now we've got ourselves two different choices. We're editing, or this is going to be a new item. All right, let's see if this works. Okay, we're back in the application, so let's go ahead and show all the gadgets and then try to create a new one. So I'm going to try the Create New button, and let's put in somebody. So I'm going to put in Decoder Ring, and lame example of a spy thing appears in what movie? I don't know, Nowhere with this actor was me, and choose Save. Okay, so it says it was added. Let's go back to the list, and where did it put it? Probably at the bottom, so let's scroll to the end, and there it is. Decoder Ring is there, so we can probably edit that thing, and let's call this thing Decoder Ring 2 and save it. Let's see if it updated. I think it will. So the last item in the list again shows Decoder Ring 2. All right, so there we go. We've got ourselves the most complex of the items. We've got creating and editing using the same form. So let's summarize what we've learned. So when we tried to create this database, we first of all had to create these migrations. And the migrations would either initialize the application or to fill it with data. If you ever change your model, then migrations will allow you to synchronize any properties in your model with a table. So then the next thing was this important thing called the identity models. And we had to add this line here to say, part of our identity models includes a list of gadgets. And so that gave us the ability for the context to have the gadgets as part of its properties. Then finally, in the gadgets controller, as we've just been working on the last few videos, we had to initialize a value called context, and then once we had that, we could reference things like this. We can say, give me all the items in the list, or search for a single item, or we could do a search for text that matches, and create and delete. So there is the example of using the entity framework. So you no longer have to create so many SQL statements. Your coding's quicker, or is it? You might think. And also see the other video about the advantages and disadvantages and whether or not your boss will actually allow you to use the entity framework. So check out some of the other videos that are in the playlist. You can see all things on how to build an ASP.NET MVC application. And I'll see you in the next.